Okay, moving on to the psychological approach. Now, this contains 3 different approaches. First of all, the psychodynamic approach.
This is basically a Freudian thing where you have the id, which is what, Liam?
It instincts and desires. It's the instincts and desires of the personality. So these things, that the id, the superego, and the ego, all make up the personality according to Freud. And yeah, the id are the instincts and desires of the personality.
Superego
is the moral standards.
The ego.
This balances the id and the superego and their conflicts. So basically, this is what you think in reality.
Okay. So, ego defense mechanisms include repression, displacement, and denial. Repression
is where the id impulses are refused access to the conscious awareness. So
it's pushed down.
All those desires you don't even know you have.
Displacement.
This is redirecting repressed desires onto a safe target. For example, if you take your anger out on a pet instead of a real target. So this is the classic example of if you have stress at work, you will go home and kick your dog.
Well, if you're an awful human being.
Yes, but that's the idea of displacement.
Denial.
This is blocking events from your awareness. For example, ignoring risks of smoking if you're a smoker.
Okay.
So there are all the defense mechanisms for the ego. So how it saves the ego from big decisions, I think.
Okay, so another few points we have. The ego is not strong enough.
If the ego is not strong enough.
If the ego is not strong enough, domination of personality from the id or super ego can occur.
Can, for example, if the id is too strong, you will have more likely to experience immoral behaviour. If the superego is too strong, you'll have more likely to have phobias or OCD. So basically, if your ego fails, you got abnormality.
Yeah. Psychosexual development.
Yes, so this was Freud's special phase.
Yeah.
These are interesting. Basically, these are the stages where problems may arise according to Freud.
Yes, it's a psychosexual stages. The oral stage.
Oh, go on.
Go on, you can explain the
anal stage. For example, if you have failed potty training, that might lead to weak ego in later life.
Phallic stage.
This is if a boy is attracted. Well, this is basically, according to Freud, if as a boy you would be attracted to your mother and you would like to kill your father because he has your mother and you don't. Yeah, they're a bit interesting here.
It's Oedipus complex.
Yeah. Basically, if you don't resolve these issues, you are likely to experience psychological illness in later life, according to Freud. Let's just make that clear. According
to Freud.
So let's evaluate this.
A positive, and it's very difficult to find a positive for Freudian psychology.
But I found one, so good.
Yeah. First approach to emphasize importance of childhood experiences. So that's a plus.
It is. He was the first one to say, you know what, childhood.
It might be childhood, the developmental stage.
But then we have lots of negatives. Obviously, first, massive overemphasis of sex and sexuality.
Case study on mainly middle-class women in sexually repressed Victorian era.
Yeah, so when Freud came up with his psychosexual development stages, he based this on this case study, which lacks population and time validity.
And it was an unscientific approach. The id, ego, and superego are impossible to directly observe or measure.
They are, which is why it's generally not a good one. But there we go, you know it now. The second approach here in the psychological approaches, we have the behavioural approach.
Abnormal behaviour. This is the idea that abnormal behaviour is learned just like normal behaviour. This can come under two or three sort of headings. There's classical conditioning, which is repeated associations. Operant conditioning, which is learning through reward and reinforcement. And social learning, which is observation and modeling your behavior on what you observe.
So, some examples for classical conditioning. If your dentist has a grandfather clock, this is probably what's going to happen. The unconditioned stimulus is pain. So, the pain of being in the dentist. So, the unconditioned response is being anxious when you're going to the dentist, because you don't want to experience the pain. The neutral stimulus in the dentist's office or whatever is the grandfather clock. This is then associated with this pain. So the grandfather clock becomes a controlled stimulus, and the controlled response is anxiety. So whenever you see a grandfather clock, you will feel anxious, and this is classed as abnormal. Because obviously, if you see a grandfather clock and you're anxious, that's a bit abnormal.
Yeah. An example of operant conditioning. If you're criticized for being overweight, you stop eating. And then you're praised for losing weight, which is a good thing, and it encourages or reinforces the lack of eating, leading to anorexia. So you develop an eating disorder, which is abnormal.
It seemed to be abnormal. Okay, so let's evaluate this. We have a positive thing here. This is a case study of little Albert. This was a bit harsh, but we have to explain it. Basically, it suggests that phobias can be learnt because he was classically conditioned to be scared whenever he heard a loud noise and a rat. So basically, he was shown, every time he saw this rat, a loud noise would be played behind him, so he'd be scared of the rat. So whenever he sees a rat, he's very scared. Yeah, so just going over that, the fear generalised also to white fluffy things, because the rat was white. So even Father Christmas's beard he was scared of, which is quite sad.
Yes, that is sad. So obviously there are ethical issues with that, which is a negative point of the study. And it's reductionist in that it ignores biological factors.
It does, it only thinks about this behavioural approach.
It doesn't explain... Oh, you can go.
No, go for it.
It doesn't explain all disorders. For example, schizophrenia isn't explained by behavioural approach.
However, on the other side, it does argue that abnormality can be treated by systematic desensitization. And we'll talk a bit about this in a moment. But basically, it's where you relax your muscles, you construct a desensitization hierarchy, you work your way down the hierarchy, and then you eventually master the fear. But we will go on to that in the next episode, I believe. Let me check, because I said this last time.
No, there's another approach, Liam.
There is. Okay, in the last episode.
Yeah.
If you want to skip to systematic desensitization, it's in the last one. Otherwise, stay here because we have one more to go, which is the cognitive approach.
So, the cognitive approach features several different parts. The first of which is the schemata. This is what, Liam?
It is organised systems of knowledge which are used to understand and interpret the world.
Negative automatic thoughts, or NATs.
These are basically negative schemata, which lead to negative automatic thoughts. For example, if you have a cognitive bias, you will magnify your failures and minimize your successes. So you'll think all your failures are really, really bad, and any successes you might have are nothing, basically.
Yeah. Cognitive biases, as you just mentioned, are...
They can things like overgeneralization, so you generalize everything. Black and white thinking, which is when you basically your magnification of failures, minimization of successes.
So it's either great,
you think you fail all the time, basically.
It's either awful or great. That's what the black and white idea is, and that's why it can be spun in a different way to lead to a negative automatic thought.
It can.
Okay, the negative triad.
These are pessimistic thoughts about the self, the world, and the future.
And a little approach we can use that's quite good is the ABC model by Ellis.
Yes, so we have 3 stages, A, B, and C. A is the activating event. So, for example, you might split up with someone.
B are the beliefs about what's going to happen. So about A.
That's right. These can be split up to being rational or irrational beliefs.
And C, which are consequences of the beliefs.
So these can be either desirable or undesirable emotions and behaviours.
Yes.
So, evaluation.
Irrational thoughts shown by eating disorder patients overstimulating their body weight.
Overestimating.
Overestimating their body weight and indicating a significantly thinner ideal weight than the control group. That's a positive point for the cognitive.
However, for that, there was a gender bias as only women were used. So obviously that's a negative of that supporting study.
Another positive is that therapy based on the cognitive model can be very effective.
However, this approach takes no account of biological or genetic factors.
So it's a bit reductionist.
It is.
Some disorders, for example, depression, may lead to dysfunctional thinking instead of the other way around.
Yep, and that concludes our evaluation for the cognitive approach, and in fact, all of the psychological approaches, which are, just to recap, psychodynamic approach with your id, superego, and your ego, the behavioural approach with your classical and operant conditioning, and the cognitive approach with your schemata, negative autonomic thoughts, cognitive biases, negative triads, and supporting Ellis's ABC model.
Hooray!
And there's just 2 to go.
Okay.